There are 3 teams in the NFL that have at least 9 wins, and yet according to their fan bases, the sky is falling, the season is over, everything is lost. Of course, that being the Lions, Dolphins, and Eagles. December has not been the month for any of these teams so far. And we're going to try to explain exactly what has gone wrong, why it has gone wrong, whether or not this is a threat to any or all of their Super Bowl runs. And, maybe it won't make those fan bases feel better, but it at least will give them a better understanding of what is actually going on. So that is the goal for today's episode. Before we get into it, EJ, my friend, my brother, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm better than those fan bases, I think, because it's all about timing in the NFL, and peaking at the right time or the wrong time can be the difference in a season. Now, I think all these teams are good enough, spoiler alert, that they're probably gonna make their noise in the postseason anyways. But yes, they are not the threshing machines that they have all been individually earlier in the season. We're gonna try and pick apart the hows and whys of that, so that their fan bases can be looking for things that need to improve to get them back to that status.
We kind of structured this episode around a few questions. I guess you can call it almost like a mailbag episode, but not really.
Sure.
But there was a few questions we got in the comments from the last episode that were asking specific questions about these teams, and then we kind of use those as a jumping off point. But before we get into those 3 teams, there was something that we wanted to bring up that I was not aware of. I mean, I was aware of it, but it was kind of more just like a background threat until all of a sudden, you wake up one day and it's like, there's no Browns left. They're all injured. Like, how is this team an 8-5 team? How are they still the 5 seed? It's kind of amazing how much it snuck up on me throughout the year. But if you look at the Browns depth chart now versus September, they have 50% of their guys at best, the walking wounded out there, and they're still a 5 seed. It's pretty amazing.
And especially in the last 10 days, that's the piece that snuck up, I think, on a lot of people was, look, every team is banged up at this time of year. Every team has lost a starter, probably a key starter at this point. Multiple teams have lost multiple starters at this point. When you start looking at the Browns' losses, they're really concentrated. They've lost their top 3 tackles. They're starting outside tackles and their swing tackle. Okoronkwo went out this week. Jerome Ford has a hand injury. He's not necessarily out, but he's dinged up. Delpit, who they just paid a ton of money, he's gone for the regular season. He might be back, depending on how IR goes and if they make the playoffs for any playoffs. But all of a sudden you look up and it's rapidly changing their outlook. We know about the injuries to the quarterback position. Those have been pretty high profile. Obviously, Nick Chubb went out. Jerome Ford came in, and we were like, cool, he's good. And they kind of went through a period there where, they had, I would term them as regular losses. And then really within the last week, it's been and blank is out. And blank is out. Mm-hmm. And blank is out too. And you're every day you wake up and there's a new Brown going to IR. And at some point, look, I know it's next man up in the NFL. I know that's what every coach will preach, but backups are backups for a reason. They are not as talented as the players in front of them. And when you lose enough starters, your overall talent level drops to the point where the needle starts to go into the red. Browns are getting close.
If I counted correctly, it's either 9 or 10 new starters in the depth chart right now relative to their opening depth chart for the season. So it's slightly under half of their team has had turnover. And in some cases, or at least in some positions, multiple times they've had to cycle new, their OT4, RB3, QB. I don't know what number is DTR at this point, because at some point he was 2, and then he was 3, and then he was 4. And now I don't even know what you consider DTR.
It's like a switch release, right?
Yeah.
The 3 is the new 2, and he's back to 3 again. Little pre-snap motion.
It is kind of an incredible coaching job by Stefanski, though, that this team is still at the 5 seed, not hanging on for dear life for a 7, but at the 5. I will say, looking ahead to the rest of their schedule, they're playing against this week. I remember, Bears, which we just talked about their defense last week. It's playing like a top 5 defense. That's not exactly an easy game anymore. Then you got Houston. Houston's very banged up, but I'm never counting CJ Stroud out, especially at home. So that's not exactly an easy game. Then you got the Jets, which good luck against that defense with backup offensive linemen. And then you close it out against a red-hot Bengals team. So it's not guaranteed they're going to make the playoffs because their schedule is not exactly a cakewalk. But I do think that it's admirable that Stefanski, with this banged up of a team, it still even has them in the conversation. Like, that's just amazing to me.
If he takes this team through that remaining 4 games, comes out with 10 wins, like if he goes 500 in those 4 games and he comes out with 10 wins with this team, one of the better coaching jobs in the league this year.
He won't win Coach of the Year just because it feels like those awards always are. It's really more like best young rookie coach than it is Coach of the Year. Like, that's kind of just what happens. Like, if Steichen takes the Colts to the playoffs, he's going to win it, right? Like, maybe D'Amico if he takes the Texans to the playoffs. But it's at least one of the top 5 in the league this year, just to keep that team afloat. Now, getting to the actual meat of the episode, what we're here to talk about for most of the show today, we're going to start it off with the Lions, and we got a question in the comments from last week that kind of spurned this discussion on what's going on in Detroit. This is from Max Smith 8475. He said, "Can you all please break down why the hell the Lions have forgotten how to play football half the time?" Which is a very broad, overarching question. I'll get into some numbers in a bit, but the short version of my answer, I should say, is trenches on both sides of the ball, especially in the pass game, both pass rush and pass protection, and they are not as deep there as maybe we thought they were going into the year, and the injuries that they have sustained have proven to be far, far, far more devastating than what I anticipated, and they are losing the line of scrimmage, especially in the pass game, like basically every single week at this point, and it's come back to bite them.
Feels like the league's gotten some tape on Ben Johnson now. They had it after last year, and they still couldn't solve him at the beginning of this year because he too had made changes, kept slightly ahead of the curve. You're talking about the talent in terms of pass protection. That allowed them to utilize all those weapons. The focus, all year, rightly or wrongly, in Detroit has been on the weapons. Jared Goff distributing, Sam Laporta having a great rookie season, Jahmyr Gibbs at some point looking like, oh, he was worth it, taking him up that high. David Montgomery playing the role that we thought he was going to play. And that distribution was really good, but the line was allowing them to do that. The offensive line, especially in the pass game, was giving Jared Goff, who is not the most mobile guy, has what I would consider decent pocket movement, but not great pocket movement, to operate at a very high level. And it feels like what opposing teams have cracked, either due to injury or just, scheme and seeing what's worked, is how to get Jared Goff under more pressure. And when he's under more pressure, he is much less effective. And that was the same as it was with the Rams. Ben Johnson had found a way to mask that largely with that very young, very talented offensive line that they'd invested in. Now it feels like the rest of the league's like, got it. Okay, we can get pressure on Goff again. Cool. We're a lot less worried about all those skill pieces on the Lions offense.
In particular, since week 9, which is kind of when Detroit started their slide. I don't count the Ravens' blowout loss as the start to the slide because most people get blown out by the Ravens. But a couple weeks after that was where we first started to see like, okay, they're not as dominant or nearly as consistent as they were. Since week 9, they have the 9th highest pressure rate allowed at 36%. A lot of that is because of the shuffling that they've had to undergo on the interior of the offensive line. They've had 5 guards take meaningful snaps in that time period. So they're not just down to OG1 and OG2 on each side. They're down to OG3. Like their backup swing guard is what they've been down to. And results have not been good. Like results have not been good at all in terms of those 2 guard spots. And if there's one thing that we know about Jared Goff, like you said, interior pressure will wreck him. He's not a hypermobile guy. He's not somebody who, is like an explosive mover in the pocket in the sense that he can quickly redirect away and then escape out the front door and turn what would have been a sack for, say, Jalen Hurts into like a 7-yard gain or whatever. And so if you get interior pressure and your guards are getting whooped over and over and over again, like, yeah, your offense is going to struggle, and that's been a key piece for, or a key problem for them. I would also say their lack of depth. This sounds so odd because we came into the season looking at their defensive line rotation saying like, oh, they got dudes. They don't really. Like, it just hasn't really taken a step. And of course they've taken some injuries for guys that we know are actually good, but you know, this is a team that, again, since week 9 are second in pressures. Like, they get pressures, but they don't finish them. They're like the same problem that we had with the Jags defense, but amplified even more. You know, they only have 14 sacks since week 9, which is 27th as a team, even though their pressure rate is 44%. So, yes, getting pressure is important. Affecting the quarterback is important. But what is just as important is actually finishing the job and generating negative explosive plays, especially on early downs. Because if you can get a sack on first down or a sack on second down, you know, it completely knocks the drive, off schedule. And there's always this misconception of like, oh, third down is where you win. Like, third down, getting a third down sack, that's what you want. It's like, yeah, obviously you want a sack on third down, but what's even more important from an analytics perspective is a first down sack or a second down sack, because it makes the likelihood of getting off the field a hell of a lot higher if you can make it 2nd and 17 because you get a sack on first down. Like, it's actually like more important to finish the job on early downs. And this team only has 7 early down sacks in their last 5 games, right? Which is not good. So getting the pressure is nice. You know, Aiden Hutchinson and you know, McNeil doing their thing is nice, but they're kind of the only ones. And there's no other finishers on this team, so they're not generating negative plays, which means they're always in 3rd and medium rather than 3rd and 11, which means their corners have to, you know, take up a much larger burden in terms of, oh, we can't just rally and tackle. It's like, oh, we have to cover the entire time. Like, we're not going to be forcing any checkdowns here. And it's made their defense kind of fall apart. You saw that in the Chargers game more than anything else. And so that's kind of why I think overall trench talent, or rather depth at trench talent, is going to be this team's undoing, which sounds insane because going into the year, that's what we thought they were good at.
We were really hopeful about production and projection of production. We knew Hutchinson was a good player. You know, Aleem McNeil had been up and down, but he came into this year refreshed. He was a little bit lighter, and his pass rush definitely popped more on tape. So we were like, hey, that's great. They've got 2 young guys, and then they have Josh Pascal, who we're excited about, and they got Charles Harris from Atlanta, and maybe he can come in as a rotational piece. And like, they've got a lot of pieces. This feels good. Pascal's not even taking first team reps. It's John Kaminsky, who has played pretty well. This is no, shame on Kaminsky's name. He's put in a lot of effort, and he's one of those guys that I think is punching above his weight. He's creating more production than we thought he would have, but we thought he would have 0 coming in, so that's not a high bar to jump over. Benito Jones has been really solid on the interior, but he's not a pass rush threat. He's great against the run. He's great against plugging up gap and a half, 2 gaps. He'll get a little bit of pressure just by collapsing the pocket, but that's not a consistent thing. As soon as Aleem McNeil got hurt, it was just all Hutchinson, and none of the other guys sort of rose up, that rising tide lifts all boats sort of thing. They just didn't. It was just Hutchinson and McNeil, and then McNeil went down. And they've got Onwuzurike, who has not been great, suffered injuries in the pros, just like he did in college. He hasn't stepped up to be that next guy. We were excited about that possibility. Charles Harris is 3rd string. Hutchinson's still doing his thing, but he's like the Lone Ranger. He's like the guy out there doing his thing. And if you're planning against one pass rush threat for a team, almost any offensive coordinator can deal with that. So they had 2 threats. We thought they had a bunch more potential threats. Those guys haven't risen up. One of those 2 threats went out with injury. Now you're down to backups, and you're seeing that result. They're pushing, they're playing hard. That's, I think, representative of Dan Campbell's coaching. But in terms of results, they're not getting home, and other offenses are able to operate with more impunity, and their own offense is giving up interior pressure and not able to operate with the same level of efficiency that we saw, that sort of just killer instinct in the beginning of the season. And I'm sure to Lions fans, it's concerning and it feels like a huge drop. It's not necessarily a huge drop, but it's two important drops in the wrong areas at the wrong time.
The remaining Lions schedule, which is so interesting. Early in the year, we looked at this and we're like, oh, Lions are going to have, an easy time coasting to maybe a 1 seed with how their December schedule looked. They got Denver this week, which is not an easy game. It's one of the hottest teams in football. They've won 6 out of their last 7. Their defense is ferocious. They blitz constantly. They take advantage of subpar interior lines constantly. So RIP Jared Goff. And if you cannot get pressure, or rather cannot get Russell Wilson on the ground, all of a sudden you got to deal with Cortland Sutton making crazy, like glitch in the matrix catches, 40, 50 yards down the field. So not exactly a good matchup for Detroit, for Detroit this week. And then you got 2 games against the Vikings still to go. And you don't even get a week off in week 17 because you got Dallas. So it's not a fun schedule for the rest of the season. They're at 9 wins, so they're probably going to make the playoffs. But if they're not careful, like if they're not really, really careful, they could very easily lose this division to Green Bay. Because if they go 1-3 in this back four, I'm not saying they will, but if they do, if they lose to Denver, split with Minnesota, and lose to Dallas, and then Green Bay runs the table, like all of a sudden it's 2 teams sitting at 10 wins. And if I recall correctly, the tiebreakers go Green Bay's way. So it's, again, fire alarm is not on yet, but we're getting close here. Like they have to get more sacks more consistently, and they have to improve their pass protection. I don't know how they can do it with their current talent issues, but that's it. Like that's the season for them. Got to do it. One quick note, and then we'll get right back to the show, I promise. I'm sure a lot of you guys are listening to this in the middle of your fantasy playoffs and trying to glean any sort of knowledge for any little advantage that you can when it comes to start sits. And I wish I could help you guys out with that, truly. But I'm very resentful that you're in the playoffs and I'm not. It was a really rough year for me, I'm not going to lie. I went against my own advice and I didn't draft Puka when he was sitting right there. Like I told all of you to draft Puka and I didn't do it because I'm an idiot. I put all my eggs in the Luke Musgrave basket when Sam Laporta was sitting right there. Nick Chubb got hurt. I spent my fab all wrong. It was bad, okay? It was a really bad fantasy year for me. But luckily, I do have a chance at redemption, and many of you also have a chance at redemption if your season went just as shitty as mine, and that redemption is called Playoff Best Ball. If you don't know what Playoff Best Ball is, just as an example, if you play on Underdog Fantasy, for instance, up to 6 players will draft 10 rounds with a roster construction of 1 quarterback, 1 running back, 2 wide receivers or tight ends, and 1 flex. The games start in the wild card round and run through the end of the playoffs, and it's best ball, so you don't have to set a lineup. Just whichever players at those positions that are on your roster score the highest, those will be the points that you get credit for so that you don't get penalized for drafting really well, but then doing really poorly on start-sit decisions like, everybody does. The thing that makes Playoff Best Ball different is that you have to be really good at predicting playoff matchups and which teams you think are going to go all the way, because once a team gets eliminated in the playoffs, you can't use their players anymore, obviously. So, for instance, last year, if you had a bunch of Eagles and Chiefs players in Playoff Best Ball, you probably won the whole thing because you had available players every single week. So if you think you have a good handle on not just which teams are going to make the playoffs, but also which teams you think are going to go all the way, you might like Playoff Best Ball. You can either play with your friends or you can play in huge tournaments with big cash prizes. Either way, you can check it out over on Underdog Fantasy using our promo code BOOTLEG at the link in the description below, or you can use the QR code that's on the screen right now. Signing up with that promo code will automatically double any deposit you make up to $100, and you're also going to get access to a free half-yard special in Pick'ems if you happen to like playing Pick'ems as well. This week's special, by the way, if you're listening to this before the Monday night game, is Jalen Hurts at over half a yard. So if you're an Eagles fan, or even if you're not an Eagles fan and you think Jalen Hurts can get at least 1 yard in a game, that special is for you. Thank you once again to Underdog for partnering with this channel and quite literally making all this possible. They are our largest sponsor, our title sponsor, our closest sponsor, and every time you guys sign up and play on Underdog, it directly benefits the show. So to all of you who've already done that and signed up and played with us, we could not possibly thank you enough. It really does help this show grow in more ways than you could possibly imagine. And to everybody who's about to sign up, we also thank you guys too, because it is a tremendous way to support what we do here, while also, playing best ball and having a little fun on the side. So once again, thank you to all of you in our audience. Thank you to Underdog for supporting us. And with that, let's get back to the show. Next team here. This comes from a question from Ultra Hot Wings 9738. He says, the Eagles have been covered a lot by you guys, and I appreciate it. But I'm curious on how this Monday night could go. A good friend of mine is a Seahawks fan, and based on the chats we have, it seems both fan bases have broken glass in case of emergency or are in full-on panic mode. Curious on how two spiraling teams with two absolutely chaotic fan bases are going to clash on Monday. EJ, are you going to that game, by the way? Because I know it's up by you.
I'm not going to be at the Monday night game. I tend not to go to later season Seahawk games unless somebody gives me really good tickets. It is a long day in Lumen Field. You're usually undercover. Most seats are undercover, but it can be really, really cold. And people are like, oh, you're just soft. When it's like 38 and raining, it's some of the coldest conditions I've ever felt. And I grew up in the Northeast. Like that, it just gets in your bones. So I'm plenty happy to sit here in the cave, watch that game, dissect it with a nice beverage and not spend all the extra time. Tend to go to earlier season games. Love Lumen Field. It's a great experience. But, I'd rather be sitting there on like a 60-degree, late summer night, like watching a Monday night game. That's a lot more fun for me. So I tend not to make reservations for those, but I'm absolutely going to be watching it because, as Ultra Hot Wings mentions, two teams that we thought were going to be at the top of the NFC, I would hesitate to put them at the same level right now. I think the Seahawks have much larger and more pressing problems than the Eagles do, but you wouldn't know it from the Philly fans, right? Again, this is a team that was wrecking people in high style for most of the season, even if they weren't playing their best games. Now, when they have not played their best games, they've been beaten by other NFC teams, and that worries the Philly faithful deeply. So I think, yeah, he's correct. Both fan bases have their worries. I would not call them equal, but it will be fun to throw that chaos into the mix.
Where do I even begin with this Eagles team? Because the more I kind of dug into it, and like we talked very recently about Eagles problems, right? And how Jalen Hurts, his pocket skills have degraded over this season. And they have. They absolutely have. I was actually going back through every single one of his pressures late last night because I was trying to gather examples for a different project that I'm working on that's related to the Eagles offense. And I went through the Buffalo game and I went through the 49ers game. And you could tell just in those two games compared to games that were about 4 or 5 weeks earlier that he does not trust his offensive line anymore, which sounds insane because the Eagles offensive line is the Eagles offensive line. But they got their ass kicked twice, actually 3 times, twice by Dallas and then by the 49ers. And the Bills also, regularly compressed the pocket against them too, and he didn't trust it. And so his pocket skills were greatly degrading, but that wasn't even the only, and I wouldn't even say it's the main problem. Like, it's a contributing problem where Jalen will run himself into trouble, or, where he will, I don't know if I can do this without a proper visual example, but he's gotten into this tendency lately where he'll do his drop back. Let's say it's a 5-step drop back or anything like that. And rather than having stable, or rather than keeping himself on a stable platform, when he's stepping up away from edge pressure on time and in rhythm, he won't kind of do the climb with the footwork that you normally see a quarterback do. He will literally tuck and then he'll again, it's not stepping up, it's running up. And it's not staying on platform. It's not staying in a ready throwing posture, I guess you could say, throughout the entire timing of the play. It's drop back, run up away from pressure, and then he'll realize that he kind of threw himself off rhythm and that he can't all of a sudden throw a deep out on time because he's not on platform, and then he'll just run and he'll get the exact same amount of yards that he would have got if he just stepped up normally. So that is also a problem for him. From a systemic standpoint, even just taking Hurts out of it, this is also a team that's been incredibly static, not using motions, not using shifts. If we're looking at just motion stats over the last 5 games, they only have 102 total motion plays, which is the second fewest, and they're at 36.3 motion percentage, meaning the percentage of plays that have used shifts or motions. That's the third least. So, Hurts's pocket skills have eroded. The system itself doesn't do a great job of just creating space that he can read quickly, using motions to back DBs off to give their guys free releases. You saw this in the Niners game. They did their usual, we're going to line up and play, and then the Niners covered everybody, and Hurts was standing back there for like 6 seconds just waiting for somebody to get open until he finally took a sack. So there's systemic problems, there's Hurts problems, and then I would also say there's run game problems too, which is now putting even more pressure on Hurts and their receivers to go out and win, because this is a team that, with their bread and butter run concept, and this has been for years at this point, their bread and butter run concept being inside zone from the shotgun, because this is almost exclusively a shotgun team. All of a sudden they're only averaging 3.3 yards per carry on inside zone, which is supposed to be the one thing that they can do on the ground to keep everything balanced. They can't do that right now. So I guess what I'm trying to say overall is that nothing works. Hurts doesn't trust his offensive line. His offensive line hasn't earned that trust. Like, they have a top 4 pressure rate allowed over the last 5 games at like 40%, which is terrible. The only teams worse than them are the Giants, Titans, and Panthers. So that's an issue. The offensive design in the pass game is an issue because it's so static, and then the run game doesn't work. So looking at this team from a top-down angle, it's not even about, what's wrong? It's more so, can we find something that's right? And other than, Jalen Hurts making spectacular plays and saying, fuck it, AJ's down there somewhere, or Devontae's down there somewhere, or Dallas is down there somewhere, and them just being more talented than people, other than those types of plays, this Eagles offense doesn't really do anything well. And it's almost kind of a miracle that they're a 10-win team, because I can't recall the last time I saw a team with a defense as bad as theirs, with a passing game that is as difficult as theirs, with a pressure rate allowed that is as high as theirs, that has won 10 games. Like, this shouldn't, the record doesn't match what the team is. And I think that's what Eagles fans are feeling. And that's where I think the existential crisis is coming from, because they've watched this team all year and they're like, we're winning, but it doesn't feel right. And all these numbers that I just talked about are why it doesn't feel right, because it isn't right. Like, this isn't normal. Teams shouldn't win like this, but they've managed to do it. And I don't really know how.
It's the roster. Like, this is a Jimmy's and Joe's thing. The roster that Howie's put together is extremely talented. And yeah, probably what Philly fans have been feeling all year is, yeah, it's extremely talented, but it doesn't feel extremely talented all the time. We should be absolutely rolling teams. And while they've been beating teams, that's what we've been saying all the way along is, yeah, they beat them, but they didn't play their best game. And, yeah, they still won. That's what we've said all year. And they have. And I think that's a credit to the talent that they have. But the talent is not being maximized. And you brought up most of the things that I saw when I went back Motion on the offense is really big. You talked about that one, but let's take a look at another team that you mentioned in this run-up, which is the Bills. The Bills' motion rate since Brady took over is one of the highest in the NFL, and they have refound their offensive footing with largely the same offense and the same personnel, but way more motion. And it's helping their offense, whereas during the same period, the Eagles' amount of motion has been decreasing, and other teams have been preying on that. You talked about the fact that the big play early in the year was, screw it, AJ's down there somewhere, I'm going to whip it down there and he's going to win. Well, right now with the way the pocket is collapsing, the timing for that play is right when Jalen is tucking and stepping up. He's pulling his eyes down right during the window where those throws would be coming open or he would be launching it. So he can't because, like you said, he's not on platform. He's got his eyes on the ball down. Then he comes out, pulls his eyes on the balls back up. But at that point, coverage is caught up or it's too far away. AJ's turning around to come back to the ball, whatever it is, and that play is not there. So you don't get the chunk. The run plays haven't been great. And then the end all be all, the reason you really couldn't compete with the Eagles in the past was even if you covered all that stuff up, Jalen would run. Well, Jalen's knee's not right. And teams are not fearing that. They're allowing that. They're like, look, the blueprint, if you want defensively against the Eagles, is line up and play contain, get a little bit of pressure from one guy to make Jalen step up, and then cover, right? Just cover. And you're not going to have to cover right in the middle of the down, and we don't really care if there's a hole in the middle because Hurts isn't going to take off for 15 or 20 yards, reset the downs, and do it all over again. And that was always the fail-safe for the Eagles offense, is you could do everything right against them, and then Jalen would step up and take an easy 18 yards, and you'd be like, damn it, his knee is bugging him. He still runs, but it's not the same. It's not explosive. He's not doing it consistently. And therefore, teams are like, look, we're going to put a nice 4-person, sometimes 5-person rush around there. We're going to create a little pressure to poke the pocket so he ducks his head, and then we're just going to cover. And it's working.
Even if he does take off too, they're like, fine, have your banged up quarterback get 15 carries. Yeah. Sure. Good for you guys. Like, that's not going to work out as well as you think it is.
No, they don't want that as the Eagles. Jalen obviously does not want that. He is not. I'm not going to say he's not willing to take off because he absolutely is. And he's a super tough dude. There's no question about that. But he's not wanting to do it. He's almost wanting to do the opposite, wanting to sort of hang in the pocket and be like, no, I can be a pocket passer, but that's not going so well. And what you said, I think, which is most important, is they need to find something at this time of year that they can hang their hat on. All teams do going into the playoffs. And, the Broncos just did it on defense. Like, we're going to create a whole lot of turnovers. Is it sustainable? No, but it's our thing right now and it's working for us. So that's what we're going to ride. And the rest of the team needs to be, average to good enough to take care of that. Right now, it doesn't feel like the Eagles on defense or on offense have that thing, have their thing. If you asked Philly fans, what's their thing right now? Like, what can they do no matter what against anybody? I don't think you'd find one answer because I'm not sure there is one.
Even the pass rush, obviously the defensive line is good, but it has not generated negative plays to the same level, like nearly the same level that they did last year, where they had like a historically good sack rate. Like, it's not the same this year, right? So, and even looking at the Seahawks game on Monday night, like that's not necessarily going to be a pushover either. And I know the Seahawks are kind of reeling in their own ways. But when I pulled coverage data for them against plays that have no motion, I was like, let me look at passing plays that are non-RPO, non-play action, no motion. That Eagles style of just line up and go in.
Yep.
It's like, what do the Seahawks do against that type of motion or that type of play? They are 8.1 average depth of target allowed, which is the 29th, or I guess it would technically be the 4th shortest in the league if we want to be more accurate about it. They've only allowed 5.38 yards per coverage snap, which is the 8th lowest, i.e. good. They have 33 forced incompletions, which is the 3rd most. They have a 13.6% forced incompletion rate on pass plays, which is the 5th best. if you're going to line up and play against the Seahawks and trust your guys to go beat press man coverage, they're one of the few teams that's actually welcoming that because they have dudes that can line up and play too. I haven't checked on Witherspoon's injury, so I'm not entirely sure what he's looking like right now, but I will say when they're all healthy and they have all their DBs out there and they can just go talent for talent, pound for pound, it's not exactly a great matchup for Philly. So they're going to have to run the ball because one of the things the Seahawks don't do well is stop inside zone. They allow 4.5 yards per carry. They're going to have to run the ball. It's going to have to be a DeAndre Swift game, in my opinion, because if they're trying to do what they normally try to do, which is say Jalen, AJ, Devontae, go win the game, this is not the matchup you want to do that in.
They're probably not going to get away with it as easily. Spoon's injury is concerning. He only played about 7 plays, I think, versus San Francisco. Had a very nice pass breakup versus Kittle, but then was out of the game and did not come back. So I haven't seen an update on his status
It was
either.
a back injury, I think, right?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Not sure what they designated. Last I heard, Pete said day-to-day, but I tend not to listen to that because everybody says day-to-day, and especially Pete's day-to-day can go on for like 8 weeks, so I'll just wait until they give him a designation later today. Definitely a better chance to match up against the Eagles' weapons if he's in there, but Tariq Woolen's had a bit of a resurgence, is super willing to play physically against big wide receivers on the outside. We saw that in person versus Cortland Sutton in his very first start ever in his career, and he proved very capable at that style of defense. He is willing to stand up and bang, and it's going to be frustrating. The Eagles are going to have to be sharp. They are going to have to lean on their run game. The defense is going to have to play better against the run because the Seahawks run game is decent inside, and the Cowboys abused Jalen Carter. And everybody's going to say, Jalen Carter had a huge play in that game. He did, absolutely, but if you look at his stats against the run versus Dallas took care of him. And now, Dallas's offensive line takes care of a lot of people in the run game, but Jalen Carter was largely neutralized against the run in that Cowboys game. It was a big reason the Cowboys were able to stay on schedule and move the ball. So they're going to have to buck up too because, Hawks love their run game. They're going to bang Charbonnet in between the tackles, and he's had some success there over the past couple of weeks. So they're going to have to just play a little bit better ball across the board. And anybody that thinks they're just going to roll in on the road, take advantage of a team that's struggling and, sort of reel off the easy W and get back on the plane, I don't think it's going to be that easy. Can it be an Eagles victory? It can, but they're going to have not just one thing, but I would say several things go right for them to make that happen.
Last topic for the day. This comes from a question from Sean Jerevac. I hope I got the name correctly. So. He said, hearing the breakdown on the Ravens defense makes me interested in what will happen when they play the Dolphins in a couple weeks. The Dolphins offense looked horrible last night, but with all the motions, it could be a good matchup. How you guys bring this up for the second show, or hope you guys bring this up for the second show of the week next week, which is this show. So he mentioned a Dolphins offense looked horrible last night. Last night, when he wrote this, was right after that just truly terrible loss to the Titans, where they had, I'm not kidding, a 98.6% chance to win the game with 3 minutes left, and then Will Levis and DeAndre Hopkins happened, and it was horrible. And I DM'd Travis after, and I was like, dude, what the hell? He couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe it. Like, he was in shock, right? And I felt like that loss was the ultimate culmination in everything that we've talked about with this Dolphins team the entire year, in the sense that they get thrown off schedule by the tiniest thing, and then they really struggle to recover. It happened in the Bills game. It happened in the Eagles game. Like, every single Dolphins loss this year is from, like, literally them rolling and then getting one penalty and they can't get back in front of the chains. Their traditional drop back pass game, like non-RPO, non-play action, like let's drop back and throw, is not good enough to get themselves out of a jam when they're behind the sticks. And that has been a consistent theme, to the point where if you look at the Dolphins offense from the Titans game, you can see exactly where like 3 key penalties basically ruined the game for them. They started out strong opening drive, turnover on the 2-yard line because it's the Dolphins, of course they did. Then they had a 10-play drive, got knocked off schedule by a holding penalty, had to punt at the Tennessee 45 on their second drive. Then they had a blocked field goal on the next drive. Then they had another punt on the next drive after that where they, again, got knocked off schedule by a penalty. Had another drive right after that, got derailed by a hold, which then led to a long third down that they couldn't pick up, took a sack because their offensive line is just really struggling in pass protection. Then they finally got 2 short touchdown drives back-to-back of 12 and 8 yards, respectively. You know, they got set up by turnovers and special teams and everything like that. I think that was around when the Will Levis pitch went awry. But it was one of those games where you look back and you're like, how did the Dolphins actually get their points? Okay, you got a pick 6 and then 2 touchdown drives that were 12 yards or less. The rest of the game, like, they got yards. Like, their yards per play was fine. They were getting explosives. They were doing their thing. But the moment, I'm talking the very moment, they had a hold, they had a false start, they took any sort of negative play whatsoever. This is not a team that can get knocked down into the mud and get back up. Like, everything has to go perfect. And when it goes perfect, it's beautiful. It's like a fucking symphony over there. But the second somebody plays the wrong note, it all falls apart. And that's been their weakness this year, is they either play a perfect game or they lose. And I feel like in January, you have to be able to get dragged down into the mud and be able to get yourself out of it. I'm not sure they can. And I don't really know how they're going to be able to fix it either.
There's no easy answers. My take on the Monday night game that Sean was talking about when he made this comment was this offense, and this isn't, heady Oxford level stuff, without Tyreek Hill is very, very different. And like worlds different, black and white different. And he was in for the first quarter. They showed real flash, and Tyreek Hill, because of his ability, he's playing like Superman this year. He's on pace for 2,000-yard season, and the amount that he affects a defense, whether or not he is catching the ball, is ridiculous. Like, his gravitational pull is about 2.5 to 3 defenders that will just be like, we kind of got to go over here because if he hurts us, it could kill us. If any of the rest of these guys hurt us, it's not going to kill us. Now, this is not Waddle slander. Waddle is a very good wide receiver. He ain't Tyreek. It's not the same. Not in physicality, not in yak. Like, he can get open, and he is a very good number 2. I would be happy to have him on my team, but he is not Tyreek Hill. And this team, the offense that McDaniel's built is built around the explosion that Hill brings it. And it's the same with Tua. We love Tua. We really love Tua when Tyreek Hill's on the field. Tua without Tyreek Hill, especially over this last half of the season, not good. His numbers drop precipitously without one player on the field. Like, if that's not an MVP argument, I'm not sure what it is. He's not going to win it, but the difference in this offense is obvious. And when that's the wrong note, when he gets dinged up, gets his ankle rolled, and goes off the field for a quarter and a half, like, forget it. This offense isn't going anywhere. They talked about how they want to establish toughness. Everybody talks about the timing and the precision of their routes, but they want to be tough. They're struggling to do that right now, especially along the offensive line with injuries. They've gotten some guys back. Guys have gone back out on injury. But more so than that, the sort of underlying current of, can we be tough? Can we punch scores in the red zone? Do we have to get away from the trickery and just say, our guys on your guys, we're getting 6 here? And it doesn't feel like this Dolphins team can do that right now. And I'm with you. I'm not exactly sure how they're going to generate that out of nothing in the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Another issue, which is semi-related, actually not even semi, very much related. Offensive line being as thin as it is for them, kind of honestly a similar problem to Detroit, where we kind of came into the year and we're like, oh yeah, they got enough. It's like a hockey team. They're 2 benches deep. They're going to be fine. No, they're not. They are not 2 benches deep. whatsoever. They lost Connor Williams to an ACL and then had to move Liam Eichenberg over to center. And that means all of a sudden, you've got Robert Jones coming into the game at guard, which is, in terms of the guard play they were getting earlier in the year to the guard play that they get from Robert Jones, it is a Grand Canyon of difference, right? And that one injury might end up hurting them more than almost anything else other than a Tyreek injury, right? Because interior pressure, again, is something that affects Tua very similarly to how it affects Goff. They're both not the most mobile guys. They need to have the interior of the pocket rigid, firm, clean, give them space to step up and operate and everything like that. When Robert Jones is in the game, that ain't happening. So they got to figure something out. Like, they really, really got to figure something out, or else their offensive line injuries are going to be their undoing, because you got Kendall Lamb out there also at left tackle. Their starting five in the games that they were healthy this year were brilliant, like absolutely brilliant. They don't have it anymore. And I don't know if they're deep enough on that offensive line to go up against, like you said, Baltimore. They got to play them in a couple weeks. I don't know if they're deep enough in that offensive line to hold up against that pass rush consistently. And in fact, I'd venture to say that if those two teams are playing today, knowing what we know right now, I'd probably take the Ravens by a touchdown. I really would, because I don't think Miami can protect, and I don't think they can stay on schedule against that Ravens D. And once they're off schedule, kind of toast.
They don't rebound well from getting punched in the mouth right now. And playoff football is all about getting punched in the mouth, whether it's through injury, whether it's through a defensive coordinator coming up with a one-day plan to really just stick a knife in whatever you do well and say, do something else, whether it's weather. I don't have a lot of faith in this team right now to get knocked down to the mat, pop right back up, and punch back and say, okay, let's go. It's possible, but the window for them to do that, the crack in that window is really thin. They're going to have to squeeze it in there. And like you said, it's easy to get off that schedule, and it's not easy for this team to get back on. And that's a concern.
Overall, I would say the main message of today is each one of these contending teams has to hit a lot of green lights for the rest of the year, right? They each have a narrow slice in which they can win the game right now, let alone against other contending teams. It's not impossible for all of them to go on a run. Like, I would still probably take all of them over the vast majority of teams in their conference. But when or at least when comparing them against the two teams that I think are at the top of their respective conferences, 49ers and Cowboys in the NFC, Baltimore in the AFC, it doesn't feel the same to me. It feels like kind of two tiers of good team exist right now, and all the teams that we talked about today are in the second tier. We didn't think they were going to be, but they are, and might be a tough pill to swallow for those respective fan bases, but deep down inside, I think they know that's true.
Well, they've seen it demonstrated, and again, Bill Parcells would say that confidence comes from demonstrated ability. If you're lacking confidence as a fan right now, it's because the demonstrated ability of your team to do some of these things that are very important to win football games is not what it was earlier in the season. It's not that your team's never done it, not that your team can't do it again, maybe even in the playoffs. It just doesn't look like it right now for the reasons we talked about. I'm with you. Can they rally? Can they beat most of the opponents on their schedule? Do they match up favorably, when they get to the playoffs? Sure. And again, the season's a roller coaster. They were up, they're down now. Does it mean they're not going to be up again before the season? We've seen this happen with multiple teams throughout the year going in both directions. So this is not the death knell. This is not the final tally. We are not saying, they can't do it. We're saying they have to. I love the hit a lot of green lights. That's perfect, because they're just not able to impose their will like they were earlier in the season in some of the things they were best at. Now that they've sort of lost that best punch, can they come up with the other hand? We'll see.
Before we get out of here, I want to thank our partners over at Homage, which so graciously host all the bootleg merch, as well as officially licensed NFL merch for whatever your favorite team is. So even if you don't want a bootleg shirt or a bootleg hoodie this holiday season, but you do want something for one of your, or not one of, for your NFL team. Well, I don't know, maybe some of you guys root for multiple teams. You can head over to the link in the description below or use the QR code that's on screen right now, because we get a cut of anything, not even just NFL related, but anything at all on Homage that you use or that you buy with our link. We get credit for that and a cut of that, and we appreciate all of you that have supported the show indirectly by doing that. Also want to thank our direct supporters over on the executive producer tier on Patreon: Murat, Consti, Andrew, Liam, Connor, and Mike L. Once again, couldn't do this show without you guys. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Thank you to all of you for watching this late in the show. Hope that we shined some light, however depressing it may have been, on 3 contending teams that are struggling right now. Again, if you guys have any comments, questions, suggestions for next week's show as we gear up for the home stretch heading into the playoffs, please feel free to leave those below. It kind of makes our job easier if you guys tell us what you want us to talk about, so that definitely helps. EJ, any final words for you?
Oh, I'm sure the comments section is going to be clean and even, and everybody's going to agree wholeheartedly.
Oh, not unhinged whatsoever. Yeah, no.
We love the input. We really appreciate the ability to be able to do this, to answer some of your questions directly from the comments. We do read them, and you all have been responding quite favorably to the shift in format later, in the later part of this year. So, thanks to you. Thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks for paying attention. And we, the bringers of doom, point us in the right direction. We too can throw a little bit of shade on your team. But until next time, we'll see you then.